I had the entire day off, and it had been one of those cold, gray, and rainy days where the storm never really stopped, just came and went in waves. I stayed in, played some video games, and went about my day like usual. Around 5, the rain picked up again, and distant flashes of lightning flickered beyond the clouds. Perfect setting for a horror movie. I made some dinner, shut off the lights, and settled into the couch, the storm outside adding to the atmosphere. For the next 2 hours, I was completely immersed. The storm got worse. Rain hammering the windows, wind howling through the streets, and lightning striking closer and closer. But there were no outages, just an overwhelming sense of chaos outside while I sat in the dim glow of the TV. It was around 10 when I finally got up to stretch my legs, refill my water. That's when I saw it. A shadow. Just a flicker of movement on the hallway wall. Fast. Too fast for me to process. I froze, my heart pounding. Had I really seen something? Or was it just a trick of light from the storm? Maybe my mind was still wired from the horror movie. I took a few hesitant steps toward the hallway, peered around. Nothing. Just an empty, dark corridor. I shook it off, got my water, and checked outside. The storm was full blast now, trees bending under the wind, roads nearly invisible under rushing water. Our town wasn't built for weather like this, so whenever it happened, it felt off. A little surreal. I went back to the couch, put on some YouTube to unwind, but I wasn't really watching. My mind drifted, lost in that eerie post-horror movie haze. Then, I saw it again. Another shadow, this time in the reflection of the TV. Something moved behind me, a quick, sharp motion. My breath caught as I snapped my head around, eyes locking onto the entrance to the living room. Nothing. But my skin crawled. This wasn't normal. I never saw things like this before. And now, twice in one night. Maybe I was tired. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. That's what I told myself. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. 15 minutes later, I gave up trying to relax and decided to call it a night. Even if I wasn't tired, I figured a hot shower would help me wind down. I headed upstairs, turned on the water, and let the steam fill the room, focusing on the sound of the rushing water to drown out my nerves. Then, a sudden thud, violent, loud. The whole house shook. My body went cold. The sound had been deep, forceful, like something massive had just hit the floor. I shut off the water, quickly threw on some clothes, and listened. The house was silent. No wind, no rain, just an almost unnatural stillness. My breathing was slow, careful. I stepped into the hallway, then made my way downstairs. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to call for help, but I had to know. When I reached the kitchen, my stomach dropped. The back door was hanging on by one hinge. Wood splintered across the floor. The other 2 hinges had been ripped out, like someone had torn the door open with inhuman force. But that wasn't the worst part. The damage wasn't from the outside. It was from the inside. Something or someone had been in my house all night. And when they left angry, like they had been watching me, moving just outside my vision. And when they decided to go, they didn't just leave. They broke out. I ran upstairs, locked myself in the bathroom, and called 911. The cops searched the house, but it was empty. No signs of forced entry, no footprints in the wet ground outside, nothing missing, nothing stolen, just an abandoned house with a broken door. I still don't know who was here that night, or why they stayed as long as they did, but I do know one thing for sure. I never sleep easy in this house anymore. It was the dead of winter, snow piling up outside, covering everything in a thick white blanket. I had been stuck at home for nearly a week, working remotely due to the harsh weather. My house was small, just a single-story, 2-bedroom space, so I mostly stayed holed up in my bedroom, where I had a tiny desk set up for work. That day, I followed my usual routine. Got up, made some coffee, and planted myself at the desk, barely moving until the clock hit 8 p.m. Outside, the wind howled, shaking the windows, while the snowfall never let up. After logging off, I made some dinner, did some quick cleaning, then stepped outside to drag the trash bins to the curb. As I turned back toward the house, something immediately felt off. The snow was pristine everywhere, except for one spot near the side of my house. The texture was disturbed, uneven. I walked over and my stomach dropped. Footprints. A trail of them leading straight up to my bedroom window. I followed the tracks carefully, my breath fogging in the icy air. At the end of the trail, the prints were scattered, like someone had stood there for a while, shifting around, and it was directly below the window where I had been sitting all day. My blinds had been closed, but they weren't thick. Someone could have been watching me through the slats. A deep chill ran through me, and it wasn't from the cold. I went inside, locked the door, and tried to brush it off. Maybe a random passerby, a lost delivery person? It didn't make sense, but I wanted to believe it. I checked the window, locked. That gave me some comfort. The snow eventually covered up the footprints, and by bedtime there were no new tracks outside. I triple-checked the locks before crawling into bed. The next morning, I woke up with an eerie feeling. My first instinct? Check the window. My stomach flipped. New footprints. The same pattern, leading up to my window. Again, I rushed outside, my boots crunching in the fresh snow. The marks were eerily identical, stopping right at the same spot beneath my window. The rest of the snow around my house was untouched, no other signs of movement. Someone had been standing there, watching. I called the non-emergency police line, reporting what I saw. I knew they wouldn't be able to do much, but at least they'd have it on record. I tried to shake it off and focus on work, but my eyes kept drifting to the window, scanning for movement. By the time I wrapped up for the night, it was past 8 p.m. The wind had picked up again, rattling the house. I walked over to the window, pushing the blinds aside, and let out a breath of relief. The snow was flat, undisturbed, no new prints. But then my eyes lowered. The latch, it was unlocked. I froze. My mind raced. I had checked it. I had locked it. I had never touched it since last night. A horrifying realization sank in. They had been here. They had reached the window, and they had unlocked it. I backed away slowly, my pulse thundering in my ears. Had they gotten inside? Were they still here? I moved carefully, creeping into the hallway, scanning every shadow, every dark corner. My breathing was shallow as I grabbed my keys, shoved on my boots, and slipped outside. I called the police from my car, too afraid to re-enter the house. Minutes crawled by like hours. When the officer finally arrived, he went in to check. I waited, 5 minutes, then 10. Then movement. The officer emerged, struggling with someone in handcuffs. A man, mid-40s, disheveled, eyes hollow, like there was nothing behind them, and they were both covered in blood. The officer told me the man had been hiding inside, in a closet. He jumped him the moment he was found. I don't know how long he had been there. I don't know what he had planned. But I know one thing. I haven't slept peacefully since. I had planned to visit my parents, but since the town was small and hotels were pricey, I booked an Airbnb instead. The listings were cheap, and the place I found looked cozy enough. After a long 2-day drive, I finally arrived just after sunset. As I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. The whole neighborhood was unusually dark. No streetlights, no cars, no people. And strangest of all, the Airbnb was the only house with its lights on. I brushed it off. Maybe that's just how things were around here. I grabbed my bags, headed inside, and settled in for the night. With no plans except to rest, I threw on a movie in the bedroom and snacked. Everything was fine until I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The sound was coming from the front door. I grabbed my phone, checking for messages from the host. Nothing. The knocking continued, steady and unrelenting. Who the hell knocks that much? Cautiously, I walked to the door and cracked it open. A man stood there, maybe mid-30s, black beanie, worn-out red flannel. His expression was strange, almost confused. Hey, I said. His mouth barely moved. He mumbled something under his breath, then abruptly turned and walked away. I stood there for a moment, stunned. What was that about? Had he mistaken the house for someone else's? If so, why keep knocking like that? I locked the door and tried to shake it off. The rest of the night was uneventful. The next morning I left early to visit my parents and stayed out most of the day. When I got back around 6, I was exhausted. I spent the evening unwinding, watching TV in bed. But then, 9 p.m., knock, knock, knock. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. Not again. I crept toward the door, this time checking the peephole first. It was him. Same flannel, same beanie, standing in the exact same spot. I cracked the door slightly. "Can I help you?" The man's face was eerily blank. He just stared at me, as if he wasn't expecting to see me again. "Is everything okay?" I asked. "Are you looking for someone?" His answer was a flat, emotionless no. Then, without another word, he turned and walked off, again. I shut the door, locking everything. I kept the bedroom door open that night, just so I could hear if anything happened. Something about this was seriously wrong. Hours passed. I turned off the lights and went to sleep. Then, I woke up. Something wasn't right. I wasn't sure why, but my eyes snapped open. The room was pitch black, my ears strained, a whisper, then bang, 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 the loudest knocking yet, aggressive, desperate. I bolted upright, my pulse roared in my ears. I stepped into the hallway, moving cautiously toward the front door. The knocking was so powerful, the entire house shook. Then I saw it. A shadow moved past the window. Not just the man in the flannel, someone else, standing further back, hiding, waiting. Ice filled my veins. I wasn't just being watched. I was being hunted. Spinning around, I rushed for my phone, eyes staring at me. Through the back window. I panicked, ran to the bedroom, slamming the door shut. Then, chaos. Heavy footsteps surrounded the house. Shadows moving past every window. The handles of the doors and windows jerked. They were trying to get in. I called 911, whispering in sheer terror. My body refused to move. I just listened as the group circled the house, testing every entrance. Then sirens. Within seconds, they were gone. The police arrived and contacted the Airbnb host. His reaction? Annoyed. Not worried, not surprised, just annoyed. That stuck with me. The whole situation made no sense. To this day, I still wonder, who were they actually looking for? The previous guest? The host? Or was I just an easy target? I guess I'll never know, but I do know this. I am never booking an Airbnb again. I spent a week in Washington, staying in a remote cabin deep in the Cascades. It was far from any major town, nestled at the end of a long dirt road, surrounded by thick forest. Winter had just begun, so a light layer of snow covered the ground, but nothing too heavy. The first 3 days were perfect, quiet, peaceful, exactly what I needed. But on the fourth day, right around midday, there was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. There was no reason for anyone to be this far out. Since the cabin didn't have a peephole or windows facing the porch, I had no choice but to open the door to see who it was. Standing there was a man, bundled up in a thick winter coat and a black wool hat. His face was pale, his cheeks red from the cold, and snow clung to his clothing. He had clearly been outside for a while. "Hey, sorry to bother you," he said with a friendly smile. "I think I got turned around. Do you know the way back to town?" Town was about an hour's drive away. The idea of him walking that distance, in this weather, seemed insane. How did he even get out here in the first place? But it wasn't really my business. Yeah, I said, pointing. "Take a left, follow this road straight until you hit the main highway. It'll take you right into town." He nodded, but then he just stood there, silent. I waited for him to say something else, but he didn't. Just stood there, staring. The pause dragged on long enough to make me uncomfortable. "All right, well, take care," I said, before closing the door. I heard his footsteps crunch across the porch, and then silence. It was a weird encounter, but I brushed it off and went back to what I was doing. A few hours passed. The snowfall had started to pick up, and I was getting a little concerned about how my car would handle the roads. I decided to check the weather and went to the back door to pull the curtain aside. That's when I saw them. Footprints. They circled around the back of the cabin. My stomach dropped. Had the man wandered around before knocking on my door? Was he checking to see if the cabin was empty? If so, why? The sun had already set, and with the heavy snowfall, I couldn't tell how fresh the prints were. They could have been from hours ago, or just a few minutes. I suddenly felt very exposed. I locked every door, closed every curtain, turned off the lights, and went into the bedroom. There wasn't a TV, so I pulled up a video on my laptop, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. An hour passed. The steady sound of snow against the windows started to lull me to sleep. Just as I shut my laptop and rolled over to get comfortable, a knock. I jumped. My heart pounded as I sat up listening. Then a voice. "Hey, it's me again. I'm still lost. It's really cold out here. Can you help me?" It was him. Why the hell was he still out here? I slowly got up and crept to the bedroom door, listening. He knocked again. Steady, rhythmic, unnerving. Then, silence. The wind howled outside, but that was it. No footsteps, no retreating sounds. I had to know if he was still out there. Moving as quietly as possible, I made my way to the window, carefully pulling the curtain back just enough to see footprints leading to the porch. But none leaving. He was still there. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. The dispatcher said officers were already in the area and would be there in about 5 minutes. I locked myself in the bedroom and waited. The silence was agonizing. Every minute felt like an eternity. Then, a loud thud against the cabin. I flinched. What the hell was that? Silence. Then another thud. I was shaking. Was he trying to break in? Red and blue lights suddenly flashed through the window. Relief flooded me. I got up, moving towards the front door. "Get down! Hands in the air!" An officer's voice rang out. Then another thud, this time followed by the sound of scuffling outside. Turns out, the guy never left. He had climbed onto the roof and was just waiting. Maybe for me to fall asleep. Maybe for a chance to break in. I don't know. The police got him down and arrested him for trespassing. He didn't admit to anything else, but he'd been lurking around my cabin for the entire day. Whatever he was planning, it wasn't good. I work the overnight shift at a 24/7 ice cream shop in a small town. It's a tiny place, just one room, barely big enough for 10 customers at a time, but it's surprisingly popular. The big parking lot and the abandoned shops next to it made it a late-night hangout spot for high schoolers. By 10 p.m., though, the crowd would usually thin out, and the place would be mostly dead, aside from the occasional late-night visitor. My shifts typically ran from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m., and most nights it was quiet and uneventful. That night started off normal. I cleaned up the mess left behind by the previous shift, which took about half an hour. After that, I just sat around, waiting for time to pass. Around 1 a.m., a group of teenagers came in, but once they left, it was completely silent again. Bored out of my mind, I decided to do some extra cleaning in the back. After collecting a pile of trash, I took it outside to toss it in the dumpster, which was located near the abandoned shops at the edge of the parking lot. As I walked back, I noticed something strange. A light flickered inside one of the empty buildings. At first, I thought it was just a reflection from a passing car, but when I looked around, there were no cars on the road. My stomach twisted. Was I just imagining things? I slowed my pace, keeping my eyes on the dark windows of the abandoned store. Then it happened again. A faint beam of light moving deep inside the building, like someone was searching for something with a flashlight. And then, nothing. The light vanished. What really unsettled me was that the building was connected to the ice cream shop, just a single wall separating me from whatever was in there. I tried to brush it off, probably just some kids sneaking around where they shouldn't be. Harmless, right? With nothing else to do, I went back inside and continued waiting for my shift to end. It was now around 2 a.m. I was leaning against the counter, lost in thought, when I heard something. A faint noise. A soft thud against the wall. My blood ran cold. It was coming from the other side, the abandoned building. At that moment, everything clicked. The light I had seen earlier, and now this. Someone was definitely in there. My first thought was to call the cops, but before I could reach for my phone, the front door opened. A man walked in. It was unusual for a single customer to show up this late at night, but something about him felt off. He looked to be in his 40s, unkempt, with a long, scruffy beard and greasy, unwashed hair. His eyes were dull, almost lifeless, and as he stepped closer, a horrible stench hit me. Welcome in. What can I get for you?" I asked, trying to sound normal. He just stared at me, then at the display case, then back at me. For a few long seconds, he said nothing. Then out of nowhere, he smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was eerie, slow, deliberate. Without a word, he stepped back and walked out the door. I whispered, "What the hell?" under my breath. Something about that whole encounter didn't sit right with me. Between him and the noises from the abandoned building, my gut was screaming that something was wrong. But what could I do? I told myself I was just overthinking it and tried to shake off the feeling. To clear my head, I decided to take my break. Normally, I'd eat in the back room, but I wanted some fresh air, so I grabbed my lunch and went to my car. I sat there, eating, watching the quiet, empty parking lot. Everything seemed still, peaceful. No sign of the strange man. No flickering lights in the abandoned store. Maybe I was overreacting. Then I saw movement. A figure appeared from around the side of the shop. Then another. My heart dropped. The first man was back. And this time, he wasn't alone. The second guy was holding something in his hand. Even from a distance, I could tell. It was a flashlight. A lump formed in my throat as I watched them walk straight into the ice cream shop. They weren't acting like customers. They weren't looking for ice cream. They were searching, looking around like they expected to find someone. Looking for me. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering my location to the dispatcher. As I kept watching, the two men jumped over the counter, peering into the back room. Then, after just a few seconds, they ran out. They didn't take anything. They weren't there to rob the place. They were looking for me. They sprinted around the back of the shop and disappeared into the night. When the cops arrived, the men were long gone. But one of the abandoned stores had a broken door. They had been inside all along. I don't know what they were planning. But thinking back on it now, that first guy, he wasn't just a customer. He came in to check if I was alone. And if I hadn't decided to take my break in my car at that exact moment, I don't know what would have happened.